Welcome to the Politico newsroom. I'm James Hohmann here with Alex Burns. Politico has just conducted the first poll of the Virginia governor's race since last week's shutdown. What did we find?
Well, James, we commissioned this poll from a Democratic firm, public policy polling, Republican firm, Harper polling, and the results are pretty striking. This race has been pretty stable for most of the summer, with Terry McAuliffe leading Ken Cuccinelli, the Republican, by maybe 3 to 5 points. This poll shows in a three-way race with Cuccinelli and Libertarian Robert Sarvis, McAuliffe is actually up 9 points at this stage, 44% to Cuccinelli's 35%, Sarvis's 12%. There's really only one explanation for why he'd be faring considerably better now than he was a week ago, and that's, of course, the government shutdown. You'd expect that a shutdown would have an outsized impact in Virginia, given how many government workers live here.
And we asked about the shutdown. What were some of those numbers?
Well, I think the key number is 62% of Virginians oppose the shutdown. Of that 62%, 64%, so 2/3 of the people who oppose the shutdown support Terry McAuliffe. So, that's not necessarily causation. It's not necessarily that they're supporting McAuliffe because of the shutdown, but it tracks pretty well. And this is really the problem for Cuccinelli, who you saw over the weekend appearing not quite jointly with Ted Cruz. It's just awkward to try and deliver his own message with all this as the backdrop, isn't it?
Yeah, it really is. And there's Cuccinelli's really boxed in. He has a difficult issue. He struggled with how to message around the shutdown. Initially, he said, I don't really want to shut down, but he didn't say until last Thursday that he thinks this fight over whether to fund the health care law should be separated from the budget. He's become increasingly critical of the shutdown because I think their internal numbers are probably very similar to what we're seeing in our Politico poll, but it's a rock and a hard place for him. There are a couple numbers that really jumped out. Cuccinelli needs his base to turn out. He needs conservatives to go out because it's a low turnout off-year election. It's not a presidential year, but he can't turn off the independents. Only 71% of Republicans currently back Cuccinelli compared to 81% of Democrats. We, in our poll, asked if you voted for Mitt Romney last year. 8% of Romney voters are defecting to Terry McAuliffe. 14% of them are defecting to Robert Sarvis.
Maybe they just like very, very rich men.
They do. But and none of these people know who Sarvis is.
Right.
And that speaks to the lesser of two evils element of this. Both candidates are dramatically underwater, viewed significantly more unfavorably than favorably, and it's almost certainly going to stay that way until Election Day, especially when you look at TV. All of the ads are attack ads. 49% of voters view Terry McAuliffe unfavorably, 56% view Cuccinelli unfavorably, 22% more view Cucc unfavorably than favorably. So no one knows who Sarvis is, but he's getting 12% because you don't like either of these guys. You pick the third option.
And to your point about how nobody really knows who they're voting for when they say Sarvis, when you take him out of the poll, so when he's in the poll, McAuliffe is up 9. You take Sarvis out of the poll, McAuliffe is up 10. So that's statistically indistinguishable.
Right.
You're not talking about a situation where you have disaffected moderate Republicans or libertarian Democrats defecting to this guy.
Right.
It's we don't want to vote for one of these two people, and it breaks down pretty randomly between the two parties.
Yeah, and absolutely. And the second point on that kind of stuck between a rock and a hard place then for Cuccinelli is overall, surprisingly, 31% of Virginia voters support shutting down the government to try defunding Obamacare, and 28% of voters overall are willing to risk a default to not raise the debt ceiling. Cuccinelli needs those people, so he can't come out too strongly and say this is ridiculous, Ted Cruz is out of control, we need to fix this. And Ted Cruz's favorable, unfavorable number in this poll, 26% of voters view him favorably, 45% view him unfavorably. Cuccinelli needs those 26% to show up. And so he wants to condemn the shutdown, wants to criticize it. There's 175,000 Virginians who have been furloughed, but he can't really, he's boxed in. His hands are tied. And this is so frustrating for Republicans because they felt like they had a rough summer. All the Star Scientific stuff was really hurtful. They were finally going to turn the page. The focus was going to be on the implementation of Obamacare in October, which they thought was going to be rocky. We asked a question about that.
So two key numbers around Obama and Obamacare. The president's job approval, underwater in the state. 45% approve, 49% disapprove. That should be good for a Republican candidate. And on Obamacare, we asked, based on what you've heard about implementation so far, is your view generally positive or generally negative? 60% of voters said they had only a fair or poor view of the implementation of Obamacare. Again, something that should be really helpful to a Republican running statewide. It's just people aren't focusing on that because of the government shutdown. You take that out of the mix, and maybe we're looking at a very different race right now.
Right. So there's three big questions that come out of the poll. The first is, how will this protracted standoff in Washington affect voters, especially if it's prolonged, potentially through the election?
I think the second big question, given all the clutter that Ken Cuccinelli has to break through, does he have the money to make that happen? There's a big fundraising disclosure deadline coming up next week. We will see what the candidates have in the bank.
And the third big question is, will Robert Sarvis get into the last debate on October 24th at Virginia Tech? Organizers said the cutoff would be getting 10% in the polls. In our poll, he's at 12%. If Sarvis gets in, that's very bad news for Cuccinelli because it will make it harder to break through when he's being outspent on the airwaves. In the Politico newsroom, I'm James Hohmann.
I'm Alex Burns.